annual Loundy Human Rights Distinguished Speaker Series on Wrongful Conviction. We're extremely proud to host David Harris, and before I introduce him more fully, I just want to thank a couple of people who were instrumental in bringing us together this evening. First and foremost, I want to thank Joe Loundy, who I don't think is actually here yet, fashionably late, perhaps. He's the founder of the Joseph Loundy Human Rights Project and an alumnus of Roosevelt University and the University of Chicago School of Social Service Administration. I just want to tell you a little bit about the Loundy Human Rights Project before we get started, just to put this in context. Joe is kind of a legend in Chicago because there are few other social justice challenges that Joe hasn't affected for the better. He's one of the founders of the Center on Halstead, former president of the SSRA Alumni Board, and current president of the College of Arts and Sciences at Roosevelt Advisory Board as well. He's also president of the Chicago Art Deco Society and a major supporter of the Southeast Asian arts and culture in the city. He also supports both individuals and specific causes in Cambodia itself. So we're really, really pleased that he decided to engage our undergrads in the ways that the Loundy Human Rights Project does. So basically what we do is we rotate amongst several interrelated human rights issues. And through the program, students this year and the last couple of years have been studying sources of miscarriage of justice and working towards the most fruitful areas of reform. So they're doing this through these kinds of seminars with people like David Harris, other experts in the field like Richard Leo and Mark Loftus, folks that are working to change the laws and to fight some of the hardest wrongful conviction cases like Rob Warren and Steve Prison out of the Center on Wrongful Convictions. And the last one of these talks, we actually hosted Karen Daniel and Nicole Harris, and just heard for the first time in public, Nicole talking about her wrongful conviction story and talk about some of the specific ways that women in particular are vulnerable to these kinds of problems. We then each year go abroad to study in another city the same problem and to look at, with sort of analogous leaders in the field, look at the ways that the problem has been addressed elsewhere, and then bring that experience back to Chicago to talk a little bit about how that can inform our own solutions here at home. So really taking this comparative perspective and also not othering human rights, looking at the way that human rights challenges actually occur in an everyday way here, not just in remote places. I want to just briefly thank Dean Bonnie Benson-Hauser, Dean Julie Rowan, and Associate Dean Mike Ensdorf, as well as Laura Janota in Public Relations, and finally Sherry Berkowitz in the Department of Psychology, who really has just completely made this series happen this year, especially when I've had a lot of other things on my plate, so absolutely would not be happening without her. A couple of other brief announcements before I introduce David. There was a snafu with our catering order, so my wonderful grad assistant has gone to get some refreshments, so there will be some eventually back there. If you decide to help yourself later, please just do so quietly if you possibly can. And we will have some time for Q&A later, but I know several people will have to leave around 6 for classes that start then, so if you do need to leave early, I'm sure that David will understand. It's no comment on the intriguing nature of his talk, but instead on just our course scheduling. So David Harris studies, writes, and teaches about police behavior and regulation, law enforcement, and national security issues and the law. Professor Harris is a leading national authority on racial profiling. His 2002 book, Profiles in Injustice, Why Racial Profiling Cannot Work, and his scholarly articles in the field of traffic stops of minority motorists and stops and frisks, something that my students will learn a lot more about in London this year as well, influenced the national debate on profiling and related topics. His work led to federal efforts to address the practice and to legislate and to voluntary efforts as well in over half the states and hundreds of police departments to change the practice. He has testified 3 times in the U.S. Senate and before many state legislative bodies on profiling and related issues. His 2005 book, Good Cops, The Case for Preventive Policing, uses case studies from around the country that show that citizens need not trade liberty for safety, which is a major theme of many of our courses here at Roosevelt, of course. They can be safe from criminals and terrorists without sacrificing their civil rights if law enforcement uses strategies based on prevention. He gives speeches and does professional training for law enforcement, judges, and attorneys throughout the country, and presents his work regularly in conferences and other settings to try to educate the public, the legal field, and the academic field about these ongoing injustices in what we like to think of as being kind of a model legal system in many ways. Professor Harris also writes and comments frequently in the media on police practices, racial profiling, and other criminal justice and national security issues. In 1996, Professor Harris served as a member of the Civil Liberties Advisory Board to the White House Commission on Aviation Safety and Security. And before beginning teaching, Professor Harris was actually a public defender, so he really brings sort of working knowledge wherever he speaks. And he'll be talking to us today about the use and misuse of forensic evidence by law enforcement. So please join me in welcoming Professor Harris.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Barrett. What a joy it is to be with you, and I do want to thank Professor Barrett, everybody here at Roosevelt, especially Mr. Loundy, if he has come. I want to thank him. It's a special treat for me to be here because I am a Chicago boy, and there is nothing better than doing something like this, talking about the work that you love and that occupies your mind, and then to have family and friends here, which I am lucky enough to have. So I welcome all of you. It's my pleasure. I think that this is this set of issues is something that concerns anybody who is involved with studies or has ever thought about the idea of justice. I want to start there and I'll end there too. So let's start here. Law enforcement and science. Law enforcement and science. Right now, 21st century seems to be a kind of golden moment or a partnership between law enforcement and science. And you can see it everywhere. You can see it out in the world, and you can see it even in our world of entertainment. Right? Here, take a look. This is, CSI to the max. How many years, how many different programs and so forth. It used to be that in police shows, you saw images like the one on the right. The police officer with a gun and handcuffs chasing down the bad guys. But now, when you look at our entertainment options, whether they're TV or movies or whatever else concerning police, it looks more like this. The police officer with the test tube, with the high-tech gadget, getting the DNA sample. It is a different world. And you can look at the news. This is just some of the results of a random sort of Google search I put in, DNA and cold cases. And look what you get on any of these. There are thousands of entries like this. DNA match leads to cold case conviction in 2003 sexual assault, an article from 2012. And on and on and on. There is just no limit to the number of stories that we see like this. So right now, it's really tempting to think that science has become the handmaiden of law enforcement. That there is no way that bad guys can escape anymore in most cases because science and law enforcement have become partners. Science is the handmaiden of law enforcement. But I want to pause here, and I don't want to just say this, I want to ask it as a question. Is science really the handmaiden of law enforcement as it sometimes appears to us? I don't know. I don't think so. Not so much, actually, when you look at what's really out there. Because when you begin to review the science that exists on things that are beyond DNA and, say, classical chemical analysis. DNA, law enforcement loves it, at least when it goes their way. More about that in a minute. Chemical analysis, the classic kinds of chemistry to determine what killed a person or what was in a person's blood. No question about that. But when we get beyond that, it turns out there is a whole bunch of science that has been done over the last 3 and 4 decades about many of the most basic aspects of police work. All right? Science on eyewitness identification that I know some of you are familiar with. Science on the interrogation of suspects. And science on very basic kinds of forensic work. Things beyond DNA and not chemical analysis related forensics, but the kinds of things that we think about every day as forensic work, and I know some of you are familiar with. There's a lot of science on this. And it gets ignored at best. All right? Law enforcement doesn't want much to do with this science, it turns out. They basically take the attitude that they're going to resist this science. Now, I want to be clear, not all law enforcement is of one mind on this, and there are some police departments and some states that have taken the best science that we have to offer and really improved what they've done in these very basic ways. But for the most part, it is not happening. There are years of rigorous, published, peer-reviewed scientific work on eyewitness identification, on the interrogation of suspects, and on basic forensics. And what's unique about this science, and one of the things that really attracted me to this whole project, was that this science not only does